there's any sleeper team in this tournament that is not among the best sides in the world, but certainly better than being lumped into the dark horse category, that really, really slim gap in between the two, Uruguay is certainly within there. La Celeste, who could not love the old school, cool Uruguay national team, the very first ever World Cup champions, 2 times overall. You wouldn't guess we're one of only 8 nations to win the trophy way back when. But quite amazingly, this country of just 3.5 million people have managed to remain a relevant force in the global sport 80 years later, particularly when going through a renaissance period beginning at South Africa 2010. Unexpectedly, Uruguay went to the semifinals in that tournament, and barring a Luis Suarez suspension for the match against the Netherlands, who's to say they couldn't have gone even farther? Followed a year later by a 2011 Copa America victory, their first title in South America since 1995, and Uruguay had really perched themselves as back on the main international scene. I know that England is referred to as the mother of football, but I personally have always affectionately given a nod to Uruguay as the father of the World Cup. This is the country that gave us the World Cup, the very first edition back in 1930, the first country who really produced a major upset in a World Cup final in 1950 against giants Brazil. And now in 2018, this Uruguay side has a really exciting team to look forward to this summer. What really, really makes Uruguay a force to be reckoned with in 2018 that presents this distinction from the 2014 and 2010 side is now, finally, they have a midfield. In 2010, they were anchored at the back line by the likes of a younger Diego Godin, Jorge Fusile, I remember Mauricio Victorino, Diego Lugano. Up front, of course, they had Diego Forlan, a younger Luis Suarez, Edson Cavani. Diego Forlan's individual performance in 2010 remains, in my opinion, the best performance by an individual player in a World Cup in the modern era. Produced some of the best goals of that tournament in the third-placed game against Germany, the semifinal against the Netherlands, against South Africa as well. 2014, they entered the World Cup as one of the seeded teams, but they were upset in the group stages by Costa Rica before being dumped out by Colombia in the round of 16. But the piece that was missing in that 2010 and 2014 Uruguayan side was the middle, linking the back line and the creativity up front, and that's the midfield. And Uruguay have finally sorted it out. And we know that they have because for the first time in the modern era of South American qualification, Uruguay have avoided the 5th placed spot. They had to go to it in 2002, 2006, 2010, and 2014. That is actually kind of stunning because 10 spots in South America, a team finishes in 5th 4 cycles in a row. And in 2018, they bucked that trend by finishing with 31 points in the 2nd place position. So in the world's toughest qualification region, Uruguay finished only behind Brazil. Think about that for a moment. Because certainly, if you finish among the best in South America and you finish only behind Brazil, you have to be considered a contender to make a very deep run again in the World Cup. And since this Uruguayan team is better, that overall, they're more complete. That's the word to use, complete, than that 2010 side. I view them as sleeper candidates to go all the way and actually win this tournament. Might be one of the few analyzers out there who consider Uruguay among the 6 or 7 teams that can actually win the World Cup this summer. But I'm going to go ahead and say it. I think they can win the World Cup this summer. Not only have they sorted out their woes in the center of the pitch, but they also have an excellent blend of youth and experience coming through their squad. You have young players like Diego Laxalt, Georgian de Arrascaeta, who's shined for Uruguay in recent youth tournaments. Rodrigo Bentancur, he could be a potential breakout star at the World Cup. He plays for Juventus. Federico Valverde, I believe he plays in La Liga for Deportivo La Coruña, if I'm not mistaken. Lucas Torreira. In addition to now an older Cavani and Suarez, who are now the veterans of the same team that they were juniors in back in South Africa 2010. I think this squad is being massively overlooked at the current moment. And in juxtaposition to the fact that they drew arguably the most favorable group they probably could have gotten, Uruguay very much were the big winners of the World Cup draw. Russia, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, they should get 9 points. They should get 9 points. They should come up against either Portugal or Morocco in the round of 16. Close if it's Portugal, but I would give the edge to Uruguay because I do think they're more well-rounded than Portugal are. That sets them up for a quarterfinals, possibly against maybe France or Nigeria or Peru. That's winnable. Uruguay look like they have a path to at least the quarterfinals here. They certainly lucked out compared to all the other top sides in the world who have more difficult groups to contend with. And you know, also up front, Edison Cavani having the best season of his life at PSG. Luis Suarez, not such a great season with Barca, but he always shows up for the Uruguayan national team. You can count on him to do something that'll grab attention, whether it's controversial or if he redeems himself and say, I don't know, goes on to win the Golden Boot for Uruguay or whatever. But this is certainly a team that can do some major damage. And if I ponder over it a little more, I'm not so quite sure there are any major weaknesses on this team. They are not among the 3 or 4 favorites to go all the way. But I'm reminded sort of a certain Italian team in 2006 who entered the tournament ranked 13th in the FIFA rankings, and not many people gave them much thought to put on a surprise. Is Uruguay Italy 2006? I don't want to get ahead of myself. I don't want to make you, scratching your heads wondering, huh? All I'm going to say is this. If there's any team, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, that is just in between the crack of favorites and dark horses, a sleeper team, and if there's any team that's giving me the most pause for thought, it's Uruguay, because they could be on the cusp of doing something extraordinary this summer, going on another deep run, maybe potentially to the semifinals, and if everything falls their way, maybe one step further.